Hi everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
I hope everyone is doing good. How about you, Josephine?
Yeah, I'm all right. How about you?
Yeah, we were actually talking, right before that my laptop has died 2 times today. So it's been a bit hard, like working, but probably I plugged in too much stuff.
Oh no, we're living dangerously. Like your laptop might die. My cat sleeps like right next here, so it's just a matter of seconds until he sits on the keyboard again. So,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
danger zone.
Yeah,
No,
we're on the edge.
yeah, but that doesn't stop us, right? So,
No.
super excited to be here today. And it's already our 8th edition of Girl Code Coffee Chat, right?
Yeah, this is eighth edition. Time flies.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're new, oh, and Kat is here. Hi,
Ah,
Kat.
hey, Kat.
If you're new to GirlCode Coffee Chat, we originally founded this initiative because we realized we had a bunch of GirlCode ambassadors at Storyblok where we both work, and GirlCode is basically an initiative to support women and girls in tech, fight for equal pay, and just generally representation of underrepresented groups. So we're super excited to be a part of that, but you can join the stream, of course, whether you're a member or not, whether you're a girl or not, however you identify, everybody's very much welcome. And yeah, of course, as always, if you have any questions in between, you can always ask in the chat. We're really excited to hear from everybody.
Thank you, Josephine, for always giving such a nice intro. I always tend to forget, but you always make in a nice and organized way. So I really appreciate that.
That's the German in me coming through, I guess, like organization over everything. I always have like
Oh
one eye
God.
on the clock, check like if we're running overtime. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but let's not forget, we actually invited a very cool guest. So I mean, first of all, Alba together, with us, who is always, hosting, this girl called Coffee Chat, is not here today because she's having a national holiday. But we invited her friend who is working quite actively in open source world, and we have a lot of questions we want to ask her, and also you might have a lot of questions want to ask her. So if you have any questions coming up, to our guest, who we are going to introduce you in a sec, feel free to, write any questions you have in the comment, and we're gonna do our best to pick and try to, answer during the live stream. So I think she can introduce herself way better than I do, or we do. So I already would like to invite her in this live streaming.
Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Hi,
Anna.
thank you so much. Glad to be here. Yeah, so I'm Ana, right now program manager at Tutor Group, that it's a project under the Linux Foundation.
Nice, nice. Thank you so much for already introducing yourself. And you made our job much, much, much easier. Because this is the most moment I get a bit nervous, like if I pronounce your name correctly and where you work at and occupation name, but you covered everything. So perfect.
All done.
We can close the stream now, right?
All right. No, we're kidding.
No, but that's so cool. And can you maybe, just for context, explain a little bit more what the foundation does? Because I'm relatively new to open source, and that's why I was super excited for this episode. And maybe some of our audience is too. So it would be great if you could provide some context on what you do, what that means.
Yeah, sure. So the Linux Foundation and other foundations, because this is not the only open source foundation out there, basically acts as a neutral place of software projects and open source projects, and provides support, assistance, guidance to those projects in terms on governance, also in terms of motivating contributors to help the sustainability of those projects. Because for those unfamiliar to open source, these open source projects, is not owned by a specific company or organization. So they need to exist at some point, and be sustainable. So these foundations help to achieve that, or help to leverage those open source projects. Of course, there are some independent projects that are not hosted under foundations, but there are so many others. Like, for instance, you might have heard of Kubernetes. So that was initially developed by Google, but then they decided to open source, and is hosted into one of the biggest umbrella projects within the Linux Foundation, that is CNCF. And this is one use case, like one really famous use case, but there are so many others. And some projects are more like technical projects, like the projects behind the CNCF are really, really big and technical, but there are others like more focused on sharing community learnings and sharing knowledge on best practice on specific topic that are a challenge in the open source world. Like, for instance, open source project governance, or addressing open source sustainability. How can we keep the community growing? Because as I said, it's not just about one organization owning everything. It's about community and collaborative effort to make that happen. And that needs not just developers, it needs a lot of different roles involved and getting organized and aligned on working on that same thing to make that happen. So foundations are just a small piece on the whole ecosystem that is open source.
Wow, that's just already blowing my mind. I'm like, I didn't even like, there's so much more than like, it's like an iceberg, right? Like, as a normal, what is even normal? But as a day-to-day developer, you're maybe not even aware that these things exist. But on the other hand, without it, where would we be? Like, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and actually, so for those unaware to open source, a big question that usually came as like, well, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, open source was more like a niche thing, right? Like, oh, it started in the academic field, a lot of volunteers in their spare time working on code. And it has evolved really, like, it's now completely different to what was in the past. In fact, there was I think it's Sonatype, Synopsys usually do like some reports on the state of open source, and they released the last study on the status of open source, and they were basically, it's a proof of how open source is everywhere. The thing is that it's hidden. It's like proprietary code, even though it's private. Like, I don't know, the algorithm behind Netflix. I'm not saying that Netflix uses open source, but let's put an example. But private code behind that, it's really very likely that they are using open source. I think in their report, it stated like 80% of the source code had open source components, and 75% was open source. So that is a really big thing. The main issue is that usually people are unaware on that in companies, for instance.
That's so powerful. Like, yeah, we don't even think about these things, right? And all these people volunteering their time and their effort, providing like all these contributions. That's really, like, I'm speechless. Like, just thinking about it is really, really cool.
Yeah. I also got the similar impression, like how big, let's say, like the ecosystem is actually, and how we were only seeing in one tiny specific areas only, but surrounding is like much bigger than what we were thinking. And I mean, like, I also have a bit of very basic understanding and the knowledge. I mean, like, I try to be humble, because although some of us, I mean, like Josefine and I actually work on our like open source kind of, let's say, like SDKs at Storyblok. I mean, there are lots of things we still like need to learn from the others experts, and also adapting, learning, keep, like improving the stuffs. But I mean, like when we think about and also like try to do our own research about, there are some of like, let's say, like legal part, license, things going on. So it's really like huge, and that's something that you cannot just work on by yourself. It's something that you need to get the help from the community. And I like the, let's say, environment that we have, like nowadays, that people, like try to contribute, or like willingly doing, some contributions, like in their spare time even, and try to make, the actually the tools itself to be, like better, and considering, to help the others. So that's what I also like. And I also could tell, like you have a lot of passions. And when it comes to, like telling, already how the organizations are, like helping the others, how the ecosystems are working. So I was like wondering like how you started to join into the open source community and started to be, like knowledgeable about that.
Yeah, so it's a really curious thing, because my initial bachelor's degree was nothing to do with code, was nothing to do with open source. I initially started with marketing, and I never like worked on that. But I started in marketing and in a small company in Madrid. I'm based in Madrid, Spain, called Viterja. So it's a software development analytics firm, and the tooling they were using is 100% open source. So they provide services, of course, but the tool is and will always be open source. So I initially started in like more marketing related tasks, but then since it was the community was really important and the tool was open source, I started also to get involved into DevRel, like developer relations roles in open source. So I know like there are internal, DevRel is a massive task, like different tasks and roles and professions and so on. But this was more like an open source DevRel role, and try to engage in the community and motivate the open source community to contribute and so on. And also, on the other hand, I got into data science because it was they were providing consultancy and metrics in open source to measure the health of the open source projects. And I got really, I was already had knowledge on software, on website development. I mean, I was already in contact in my spare time with programming, certain programming languages like JavaScript and so on. But I got into Python because I saw like in my company that was the language they were using. And I saw a master's degree in data science, and I said, why not? Of course, it was really hard for me. And I remember my professors telling me like, yes, it's possible to do it. I mean, they never stopped me to say you cannot do it, but it might take you more time than maybe people that come from an engineering field and so on. But well, I'm here. I'm fine. I finished my master's degree. I did like a really strange transition, but I really enjoy it. And what I can say now is that I haven't forget about the marketing stuff. Like I like to have the both backgrounds. Like I like to know and understand the way developers and data engineers work, and how the processes they follow, and also understand how maybe in management or in business they usually tend to work, and be able to act as this person that translate both worlds. So right now, that was in my past role, right? So I translated into DevRel and get more into got more data science skills. And then in my current job, I'm a program manager. So I'm involved in a project, as I said, the Tudo group, that it's a group of open source program office practitioners. I can explain later what OSPO means. But basically, it's a community of practice, and we share like best practices. The community gathers together to share best practices on how to contribute to open source projects as an organization that is different from an individual. It has like different ways of operating. And in there, I make sure that the community keeps contributing, is motivated, initiatives keeps growing, not only reviewing part of the PRs like pull requests and code, but also making sure so all the known code initiatives are also getting done, and the community keeps growing. So in a nutshell, I will say that is my story, strange story, and my current role.
Wow,
That's so inspiring.
Yeah. You really took the scenic route to get you to a place that is like what you want to do as well, and what you kind of like live and breathe, right? So it's found you in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and well, I haven't mentioned it, but I will say that in the future, like sometimes I see like what I will do in 10 years future. I think like I don't mind if I'm more in a tech role or in a community role. What I do mind is to still be in the open source community, like in this industry. Like when I found open source, I found my way. And for me, it was like, I don't care what kind of skills do I need to learn if I can still help in the community. So for me, it was more like, do I need to learn data science because that help in the project, or I can make better contributions to the project I'm engaging with? That's totally fine. Let's move. I mean, it's a set of skills. No one is gonna tell you like it's gonna be difficult because you started in a non-tech role. I mean, it's more like what motivates you, what drives you to learn new stuff and skills. So for me, it was open source.
That's really amazing, and I'm so like inspired by like how should I put into like taking an action in a passion, like driven. So it's not like I would say like some people I see, they're like, I want to study this, I want to become like that, and that's their like goals. But it was interesting to see that your passion is like something to like drive you to like study for data science, study Python, and get engaged with like the communities in there, doing DevRel, doing project manager, things like that. So everything like these like different pieces are like making present you right now. That's what I could tell, and that's so interesting to hear, because I hear a couple of, let's say, like DevRels, like me, Josefine, and the other DevRels that we know, they have also like quite different, unique background. They used to be like something completely different in the field and joined into the tech and became the DevRel, things like this. And I enjoy, like hearing, these kind of stories, because everyone has different stories. And it's so interesting to, like connect the pieces, like how, like these amazing people are, like coming up with the nice, unique ideas and coming up with approaches that we appreciate. So yeah, it's really nice story to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned already that the open source world has changed a lot from what you noticed and kind of before. And it would be super interesting to hear your thoughts on like, how is it different now? What changed? And where do you see it going maybe in the future as well?
Absolutely. So I think to answer this question, we need to differentiate between contributing or getting engaged in open source as an individual and contributing and getting engaged in open source as an employee within an organization, right? So I think initially there were a lot of individuals contributing. We still, of course, the base of open source is contributors that are individuals and spending their spare time contributing, but we are seeing organizations creating specific places, the so-called OSPOs, to make or to motivate their developers to first understand the value of open source and implement an open source culture within the organization, and third, contribute not in their spare time, in their working hours to open source, because they've seen it's those organizations, or at least the organizations that decide to invest in open source teams, have realized that open source, even though it's not something tangible, is behind all the technology stack they are using. Or maybe if they are not using, their service providers are depending on open source. And there are two ways that I've seen organizations facing or addressing this. One is the risk management position. Like, well, there are so many. I mean, open source needs to be sustained, needs to be nurtured. It takes a responsibility. If your organization is using open source, and that is very likely, because I will send you the link to the report, but as I said, it was like 90% of modern applications contain open source components. That is a lot. So if your organization is using open source and you just don't care on that, there are consequences. We have seen in the past consequences on vulnerabilities and potential risk in certain libraries that in many organizations, even you, maybe when working in code, has been using in your day-to-day lives. And suddenly you realize that, oh, we got a vulnerability. Why that happened? Well, because that library that you were using maybe is open source or had open source components or dependencies, and you did not take care of that. It's like when you decide to adopt a cat. I mean, the cat needs attention and it's a responsibility. You cannot just say, oh yeah, just get a cat and the cat can live itself, and I don't need to feed him. I don't need to spend money to go to the veterinary and all these things. So I think it's interesting to have this relationship between, well, it's a responsibility. It's like having a pet. You cannot, it's not free as a beer. It might be free more as deciding to adopt a pet and having responsibility, be aware. And of course, so that comes with the thing on why now organizations, more and more organizations, not only enterprises, but also we are seeing this in governments, like the European Commission has an OSPO, has a specific place to manage open source. And that is crazy. And I like to see these open source program offices popping up, because at least it's a way to make organizations and other people understand that this is something that exists. This is something that at least needs to be managed. Now, the other challenge might be like, how? And that comes with what is the future of open source, right? So these organizations that decides to manage open source operations have different challenges. And one of the biggest challenges is the cultural change. Like you might think like, well, this is just engineering stuff and something that it should be under engineering, for instance, and engineering should be managing that and teach engineers on how to contribute to open source, what licenses, what are education on the different licenses in open source, because there are more restrictive, less restrictive, everything about what to look in the open source projects to start contributing at. The README file, the contributing, where is the governance model of those open source projects? How an individual or a person that is contributing code as an employee can start contributing to that open source project, and how that person can be a good corporate open source citizen and don't act as someone that doesn't understand how open source works, and help the community, not only the organization. And so all this is, of course, really clear, but sometimes we forget about the thing that open source is not just about tech stuff. It also implies educating managers, because if only engineering understands the value of open source, that most of them, developers usually like open source, or in their spare time, they have been even contributing to open source projects. But the problem is that managers, might be only focusing on ROI and their goals and objectives. So they, of course, need that education, because they are the decision makers that are going to decide if this makes sense or not. And so, as I said, having this team is and dedicating resources on not just teaching the engineering teams, but also all the different teams and how all these teams can get involved in open source. It's really important, and it's something that we are seeing being leveraged with the formation and evolution of these open source offices.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because it sounds like there's a lot of, first of all, responsibility, but it's shared among so many different stakeholders, and so many things depend on each other. And maybe it sounds to me a little bit like, also, if you ever lived in like shared housing as a student, the kitchen there, you have to take care of it, but it's not sure, like nobody knows who's responsible. And then sometimes it gets very dirty. Like, it sounds like there's a lot of potential for chaos as well. Is that right?
Well, open source is chaotic itself. The thing is, organizations, in my honest opinion, organizations shouldn't put order into what open source is and has been always, but they should put order into their processes on how to contribute in a healthy and sustainable way to open source. And that's why like extra education and assistance of open source teams. So the same way there are marketing team in an organization, and there are engineering teams to manage the tech stack, and there are a legal team to manage all the legal risk and securities and so on. Why not having an open source team? Because open source is behind the modern applications. Everything is run on software. So even though it's not direct, it can have direct consequences. I don't know if I explain myself correctly in here.
No, it's very, it makes it something very abstract, understandable. And I really like that. It's like, yeah, it's interesting how so many aspects of this, like at least for me, I wasn't aware of, and there's so much more to think about, and also to be grateful for this amazing community that keeps these things alive that most of us use, right? And you already mentioned like big organizations are maybe using it and maybe they're not even aware of it, or sometimes things don't work anymore, and then they might like, is that a common use case, or what are other like pain points that organizations run into?
Can you repeat again the question?
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier that, for example, maybe an organization is using an open source tool or something, and then all of a sudden it doesn't, like, maybe it doesn't work anymore, or maybe it's not continuing to be maintained. And it sounds like that's something that happens quite commonly. Is there other issues where these organizations run into issues that we could prevent, or that if we were aware of it?
I mean, I think the major thing is not being aware on how well maintained the project is. And that, I mean, and if you're not aware, you cannot know how to sustain that project. So the first thing is about awareness and realizing which projects are at potential risk in terms of, okay, maybe, so that there's, for instance, a metric called the buzz factor that tells you how many developers are contributing to the 50% of the code. So if those developers, let's say tomorrow, have an accident or just leave the project might die. So that is a risk metric that some organizations in their OSPO usually measure. And that can tell us, okay, this is a list of projects that we are using and needs attention. And maybe there might be, they are not supported by foundations. They are independent projects, but we are using it. So how can, as an organization that are using your open source and has a responsibility, help? And there are different ways. The first thing you might think of is funding, and it's amazing and helps a lot. But usually, so there are sometimes that you send funds, you send money to those to those projects, and they don't know how to manage it. So there are other ways, like educating your employees to contribute to open source, to motivate them to contribute to those projects, and let them understand that it's going to be beneficial for both the open source community, their own career path, and also the company. And I say this like this is so easy, but it's a really hard thing. It's about having all the processes and policies in place to guide these employees to contribute to open source projects. So as I said, I would say like the main core challenge is about realizing what is under risk, or what projects are they using. And then once they know that, take actions and go beyond only, oh yeah, we know this and this is risk assessment, but go beyond and said, let's contribute to the project because it's gonna benefit the community and also the organization. But do it in a healthy way. Don't act as a bad company, don't knowing how to operate in open source, because it's a really different way of working than maybe traditional organizations are used to when they have private software or private code.
Yeah, you told us like so many things in just less than like 45 minutes, and I'm so like impressed and try to digest what I'm learning it. And you told us that like first of all, the ecosystem around the open source is like involved with the many different backgrounds of the people, and now there are a couple of additional knowledges that you need to be aware if the open sources are being used with the companies or bigger scale levels, such as like some incidents, security issues, things like that. And I was like started to think like, how did you get all these kind of information? Where are there kind of the educational sources that anyone who want to like gain the knowledge? Because I'm from my understanding, I evaluated my knowledge as an open source like maintainer, still like keep learning it. But when I want to learn something, let's say specific content related to, like managed open source, things like that, it's not easy actually to find the source, in my opinion, because first of all, the way you're going to build the open source itself is like totally up to you. What you're going to build is like not something that people could teach you A to Z. That's something you need to build with the logic coming up, things like that. But you told us like around there, like there are some of like the risks that you need to consider about it. There's the license you need to choose which one to use, many more things. So I was wondering, like, is there some kind of documentations, courses, or articles guidelines that we could look up?
So as individual, I think GitHub had like an open source guide. I think it's called. I can share it with you later if you want to drop it on the chat. But this is more like, it's called open source guide. So it serves guide on how to contribute to open source, starting an open source projects, best practices for maintainers, leadership and governance. So this is more like individual contributing to open source. In the project I am, the tutor group, is more on, we share best practices on how OSPOs and different organizations did in their past, to help other organizations to start an OSPO. And for instance, we have guides on how to contribute to open source projects, how to release open source projects as an organization. But there are also courses outside. I can speak of what I know, that is in the Linux Foundation. There are free courses on, for instance, how to build more secure software, like basics of open source security, basics of open source licenses, and so on, specific courses, more technical, less technical, more for high-level managers and more for developers. But you can take a look at that. Although I do agree with you that the need of open source education in maybe careers and university is something that is needed. It's not there. Like I had my background and I learned a lot there. And in data science, in my master's degree, we did something, a little bit of open source introduction. But I remember that I was really advanced because in my company, I was already engaging in open source. And most of the students were like, oh, Ana, they were asking me things, and I feel like, oh, I shouldn't be the expert in here, but yeah, it was like that. And everything I learned about open source was because of the communities I engaged with. So even though you find courses and there are great guides out there that the community put together, because it's about transparency and sharing knowledge, and that is one of a lot of values of open source that are commonly not seen because many people think only on the technical side. The communities, engaging with the communities, gives you a lot of knowledge. There was another study I read recently that said that we usually tend to remember the 10% of what we see and read, and the 80% of what we discuss with others. So that's why the power of community. And so I really encourage you to, if you're interested to, open source health analytics, there's a great open source group called Chaos, that is also a Linux Foundation project that focuses on that, more on the data science stuff. And they have different projects in case you're interested to contribute to code and so on. And there are other, like maybe more on the high level, where there are conversations on how to understand the open source governance of projects and the basics of dealing with open source governance and leadership, our best practices on documentation on the open source projects and so on. So in a nutshell, I will say, look at the courses, look at the internet that has great stuff. But the most important part, if you can, engage with the communities, with the open source communities. They have a lot of knowledge and they will help you in most everything of what you need.
So you actually gave us quite good, I would say, tips. So instead of searching around and just gathering the knowledges, just already practice, right? So by practicing, then you get to actually have like the real world exercises. And by the time you already would gain the experience, not just the knowledge base. Actually, like that's something more practical. Yeah, because I know, like a couple of people, like they really would like to collect all the certificates by completing all the courses out there, but they're somehow like really afraid of, like, how do I say, like putting what they practice into the more real world, like apps or, like putting into the open sources. So I think the last part of the courage would be like the hardest for the other people, but maybe like if you already start, like combining your learning process by already, practicing, then you can combine all in one and you will have better experience and knowledge probably.
And also in open source, a really interesting experience that I had in the first time is that, you mentioned like people might be afraid to fail. Like, oh no, I'm not gonna contribute because I'm not experienced enough. I might get it wrong. My code sucks. And one of the things I like about open source and engaging in my first projects in that world is that they they encourage you to try, and doesn't matter if it's not good. That is how you learn, like failing. So I like a lot the culture of, yes, please, it's human to fail, and we shouldn't be afraid of doing things wrong, because if you are afraid of doing things wrong, you will never do them. So that also accelerates the learning path, in my honest opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Arisa.
No. I want to hear from you, Josefine.
I was going to say, on a lot of projects, like if you as an individual contributor, there's usually like a tag for like good first issue or something, right? Where if you're new and you want to try it, this would be one place to start, I'm assuming, where people are looking out for these. They're there to help you. You can ask questions, and it's like very welcoming, and another place to deliberately make mistakes to then learn from them.
Yeah, actually, I want to recommend a book. I know, like, because what you're mentioning, like, oh, there are like attacks on first things, issues, and so on. I think if people here are interested to get started into open source projects, if you start with this book, it's from Vicky Brasser. She's great. She might not be saying this, but if she's saying this, hi Vicky. So it's For Your Future with Open Source, and it's from basic, like beginner person that doesn't know anything about open source to advanced. Like, I usually have it really near me, because sometimes I need to refresh some of the things on, and explains really well like the governance around, like what are core contributors, maintainers, how does the pull request, merge request systems, the branches, and how to operate with Git, and how to use the markdown syntax, and so on. So I just wanted to also mention here, because might help people to get started.
I'm interested in reading this one, and thanks, Josefine, already finding the link. I was actually about to ask because I was so slow to, catch all the title, but she already did. So if anyone is interested in, here's the link, and you could find the book itself. And yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna like have a look at it, as I was really like almost starving to ask for like where to, like get some sort of, let's say, sources to, like enhance my knowledge. But yeah, I'm really happy that we, like invited you, Ana, in this, like streaming. And I myself is learning really a lot. And I think Josefine has something to say.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, just for context, or maybe you were looking into this for different reasons, but you mentioned in the beginning already that we are maintaining the Storyblok SDKs, and that's like a relatively small project, of course, and we are maintaining it as an organization, but there's discussions around licenses and all these different things. And for some of the SDKs, then the usage picked up and people started creating issues, and there were people like me or Arisa, who don't have a lot of experience with this. And we were like, okay, so how do we talk to people? It's so nice that they're contributing, but help. And so this was really a bit overwhelming, because you want to help people and you want to give back, but then there's a million other things to do as well. So that was really a balance act. And I just thought it was so interesting to be thrown head first into this world. And you're just okay, so we're going to ask for more patience. Yeah.
But it's great to at least see an interest and a community. At least there's some interest. Now it's time to see how to manage. I really good luck with all the licenses, and it's a world, and it takes a village to build all that.
Yeah, there's so much truth in that, isn't it? We're really we're trying to support each other and trying to figure out. And Alba unfortunately couldn't be here, but she of course has also a lot of experience in the community world, and she's been helping us a great deal and shared a lot of good insights. But it's really been a learning a process, if you will, and so much to be gained from as well, because people are very, very helpful, and really finding their way around things. If maybe things are a work in progress, they're okay, so let's figure this out together. So it's really, really nice.
I have one more question to you, Anna.
Yeah.
I think Alba told me that you host a couple of workshops related to open sources. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, are there any workshops that you could share with us, or something you plan to, do in the near future about maintaining open sources, or even starting?
So the next ones will be more focused on OSPOs, as an organization, how to share best practices with other OSPOs, we call them. So this is one that there's one that will be in Germany on October in Frankfurt. That is we call them Ospology Live, Share and Learn. And basically we invite few people from the open source community, from different foundations, maintainers, and so on, to share their experiences on different topics that can be security, for instance, also some trends that is affecting open source in Europe, I don't know if you've heard of the Cybersecurity Resiliency Act, but can affect open source. So how the community can should be acting, or how does affect OSPOs and organizations. And then sharing some kind of roundtables where the community can share their learnings and put that in the shape of a guide for then the wider community to reuse, and maybe get input and put it and use it in their internal processes and policies. So yeah, that will happen. It's called Ospology Live, and the next one is going to be happening in Germany. We also have co-located workshops in existing events, for instance in Linux Foundation there is Open Source Summit, and if this we had a OSPO Birds of a Feather, again to try to share this common knowledge with open source peers. That will happen in Vancouver on May, and there will be another one happening on September in Bilbao, Spain. So yeah, those, as I said, it's part of the whole experience on the conference, on the open source conference called Open Source Summit.
Nice. I was trying to, have a look at or find on the internet, and I think I found. So probably the first one, which is going to be in Frankfurt, is this. And Open Source Summit you were mentioning is this one, if I'm correct. Both of them looks really interesting. And the first one is really lucky me, because I'm based in quite nearby Frankfurt. So I can just take the train and can go. And this is in-person workshop, right? That's also interesting.
So the first one is not the right link. I mean, is the same I've just turned the right link, but it's this.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, you were like in a
share.
virtual event that like virtual call that we usually do every month, but this is like the in-person.
Cool. And it has like a couple of days, right? Because I see the day 1
Mhm.
as the schedule, day 2 also.
Yes,
Nice,
today
nice.
micro conference. We try to put it like small so people can have conversations.
Okay. Wow. Okay. There's so many interesting stuff that I need to think hard to choose which one to go, or like arrange my schedules actually. But sorry for people who are watching live, but I'm kind of like inside of my mind too much excited right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like every single time we do a stream, like we have these interesting guests and they bring a topic and we're like, oh wow, there's so much more that like we can learn. And it's like you start with an hour conversation and then you're like, okay, I need to reevaluate everything. I need to do this right now. Like it's really like,
one hour usually is not enough, and I feel like there's so many things that covers open source, and I'm sorry if there's something that I didn't get the chance to explain it well, because I said 1 hour is not enough. It never you keep talking, and there are new things popping up, so
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a broad topic. I'm already super like blown away, but by the information that we have gotten here today. I don't know if anybody has any questions that weren't asked. Maybe this is the time to put them in the chat if you have anything that you want to ask. Anna, before we wrap this up, Arisa, do you have any further questions?
Actually, Anna already answered all the questions we had as a backup, even without asking her. So she already had a great, like roadmap how to, like put this together, provide information, like we wanted to know. And I hope like the viewers right now watching. So I actually do not have like the additional questions, but yeah, I'm so excited already to have a look at all these resources, and probably like that's what people who are watching in this live streaming right now are already starting to check out. I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Anna, is there anything you feel like well, I mean, of course we didn't cover all of it, but is there anything that you would like to share kind of as a last takeaway? Anything that wasn't highlighted enough in your opinion?
I mean, we already addressed the importance of sustainability, but in order to share like final thoughts on all about what's going on in open source, I think the most important part that I would love people to have or to learn from today's coffee chat will be the importance of sustaining the open source projects and how people can help. And doesn't matter, you might be an individual and you can help as individual, but if you are in an organization, maybe this is something you can bring to them, like the important, like is like maybe they don't know the importance of open source and that they are already using open source, but it's important to let them know that it's not just about being aware on, oh, we are using open source. It's about taking responsibility, understanding what projects are they using in order to take actions and see how to help to sustain those projects, and in terms of funding, in terms of employee contributions, and do that in a healthy way that doesn't harm the ecosystems and benefits both the organization and the open source projects.
So the key to take away for today's, let's say, like in a very, very like nutshell, is the sustainability of the open source and being aware of like what's surrounding. Also, like the real world like practices already gives you like nice experience. So, and all the resources you shared with us, and I really could like say that, I mean, like tech world itself is like community driven. And I could say that open source world is also not an exception. But I could tell like more community involved, and like people's willingness to help and contributing each other. So yeah, it was really like nice to see that, and I wish to have like another like enough time for hearing like more in depth, because I'm quite sure like after discovering like all these resources you shared with us, probably like like a couple of us would come up with like more questions in depth that we want to ask you. So maybe like that would be like the last question I might ask you. But if we want to reach out to you, or like want to like ask you if we come up with something, I don't know, additional questions, how can we reach you out?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. That is AnaJS, Ana95. I'm also on Mastodon. That is the same, AnaJS95. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Ana Jiménez Santamaría. So yeah, you can find me there. I do also started like a YouTube channel to teach open source beyond code. So I try to not get into the tech stuff, that there's already a lot of information there, but try to share like use cases on how open source is leveraging a lot of modern applications and empowering industries, like for instance the film industry, the AIs, and so on. So if you would like to be interesting, is NIJS Anna, and it's open source beyond code. That is the main title, in case you're interested. It's just 2 channels because I started like 2 months ago, but keeps growing.
Nice. So if anyone is interested in, check that out. And I'm kind of trying to find it right now, but maybe Anna, you could share with us the link quickly.
Let me share it. Okay, so up.
Alvaro said in the chat as well, companies need to start promoting and sponsoring their inner and open source. Absolutely, yeah. I think he's cheering on every word you're saying right now. Yeah, that's really, really true.
Okay,
Yeah.
Here it is.
And Anna, thank you. I'm gonna share that now.
Oh, by the way, yeah, it's in Spanish, but there are subtitles in English. I forgot to mention that.
Great.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge. I feel like I'm gonna be researching and following up on everything you said for a long time. This was so fruitful and so much information in such a short amount of time. I'm really grateful that you came to chat with us.
Thank you, and I'm really glad for this opportunity, and thank you so much for inviting me. And thanks, Alba, even though she's not here, she reached out to me, and I was really excited of this opportunity. So thank you all, the team behind, and thank you everyone that has been here staying until the end.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you. Sid just pinged us from behind the scene that we have a couple of announcements after we say goodbye. So I guess, thanks, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, so this was a wrap up of our episode 8 for GirlCode Coffee Chat.
And okay, sorry, I'm still figuring out how we should organize, but okay, let's do that. So what Josefine was trying to say is, first of all, we have the ambassador program at Storyblok. So if you're interested in joining our ambassador program, you can find the information from the waitlist that you can see from the chat and also in the screen. So we are going to evaluate like one by one, and like why not to put yourself into the name of the wait list. And then of course we are planning to have like our 9th edition of the GirlCode Coffee Chat. Haven't yet decided what we're gonna talk about it, but it's gonna be like in a month. And please stay tuned. And yes, Josefine has.
It is on the 25th of May. That
yes,
we already know.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah. Thank you so
And
much.
if you follow us on Twitch or on Twitter, of course, then you will get a notification as soon as we go live again, so you will not miss the next episode.
All right. I guess that being said, we can wrap this up. And yeah, I really enjoyed and hope everyone enjoyed this live streaming. And yeah, we will be looking forward to see you all in the next coffee chat.
Yeah, see you soon. Thank you so much for joining. Bye.